In the spring of 2024, a group of licensed hunters tracked a large brown bear through the misty forests of northern Yellowstone. The animal had been attacking livestock, and its death was meant to be a simple act of wildlife control. But when biologists opened the bear's stomach, the routine shifted into horror. Among the half-digested remains of sheep and bone, they found scraps of bright synthetic fabric like that from a hiker's jacket and a small piece of metal glinting under the lab light. It wasn't part of a collar or trap, but a titanium dental implant, marked with a serial number barely visible to the naked eye. That number, once traced, unlocked a story that had been buried for 8 years. A story not about an animal gone rogue, but about two people who had vanished into the wilderness and the darkness that had followed them there. Daniel and Savannah Moore arrived in Yellowstone in the summer of 2016, a young couple in their 30s, bright-eyed and restless for the wild. They had driven from South Carolina in their aging Subaru, the back seat packed neatly with hiking gear, freeze-dried food, and maps folded to the corners of the park few tourists ever reached. Daniel was a programmer, quiet, methodical, while Savannah, a graphic designer, had a soft laugh that carried even in silence. Friends later said they went to the mountains to disconnect, to find peace from the noise of screens and deadlines. To those who knew them, they weren't thrill-seekers or risk-takers, just two people chasing a simpler kind of quiet. They signed their hiking permit at the Beeler River trailhead on a Monday morning, marking a route that would take 3 days to complete one of Yellowstone's most remote circuits, known locally as Cascade Corner. The name alone promised beauty. Waterfalls tumbling from cliffs, mist that shimmered in morning sun, and steaming geysers in hidden clearings. But it was also known among rangers as the park's loneliest region, a place where radio signals vanished and weather turned in an instant. Savannah noted in her travel journal, found years later in her sister's attic, "It feels like stepping into another century. I hope we don't get lost." The last confirmed sighting came from a park ranger, Mike Donovan, who met them about 10 miles into the trail. He remembered them well, Daniel polite but focused, Savannah cheerful and curious. They asked him about an unmarked hot spring rumored to sit beyond the main trail, something not found on any tourist map. Donovan gave them directions, told them to be careful, and later said they looked well prepared, confident, maybe too confident. When he turned back on his patrol, he could still see the bright blue of Savannah's jacket vanishing between the trees. That was the last time anyone saw them, alive. When they didn't return by Thursday afternoon, no one panicked at first. Delays in the backcountry were common. Maybe they'd stayed to take photos or decided to camp one more night under the stars. But when 6 hours passed and their car still sat untouched in the car park, a ranger radioed for a search team. By dawn, 6 rangers and 2 volunteers were hiking the Beeler Trail with dogs, calling their names into the forest. The weather was mild, the air heavy with pine and damp earth. It should have been easy to find some trace of campfire, footprints, a forgotten wrapper, but the woods gave nothing back. By noon they reached a small clearing near the river where, judging by distance and timing, the Moores were expected to have spent their second night. What they found there puzzled even the veterans. The tent still stood, though one corner was charred and melted as if something hot had touched it briefly. Inside, sleeping bags were unrolled, not zipped. Around them, packets of food lay: ripped open rice, dried fruit, pasta scattered across the grass but uneaten. A cooking pot lay dented by the fire pit, the ashes cold. Both backpacks stood by a tree, half unzipped. Contents spilled out: a camera lens, a notebook, Savannah's scarf knotted around a water flask. Nothing about it looked like a bear attack, nor did it feel like an organized departure. It was chaos frozen mid-movement. Ranger Donovan later said it looked like someone had left in a hurry, or argued, or panicked. There were no signs of blood, no claw marks, no torn fabric typical of an animal strike. It was as if the couple had simply risen from their camp and walked into the night. When the dogs were brought in, they picked up a trail from the tent to the riverbank, then stopped. The handlers tried again, downstream and upstream, but each time the scent dissolved as though it had sunk beneath the current. The river itself was shallow, slow-moving, not enough to drown. 2 healthy adults. Yet beyond it, the forest grew thicker, darker, tangled like a secret. For the next week, the park echoed with the sounds of helicopters and search calls. Volunteers combed the valleys, and divers scoured the pools and gorges. Rangers mapped every cave, every ravine, every stretch of the Beeler River Trail. Nothing surfaced, not a torn sleeve, not a shoe print, not a trace of fire. Tourists who'd been in the area were interviewed. A few remembered glimpsing a couple in bright jackets days earlier, but no one had spoken to them. One man, camping half a mile away, recalled hearing voices in the distance, laughter, maybe, but no screams. When asked, he said he thought it was just other hikers enjoying the night. After 10 days, the official search was scaled back. 3 theories circulated through the ranger station. The first was the simplest an accident. Perhaps they'd slipped on wet rock or fallen into one of the hidden geothermal vents that pockmark Yellowstone, like traps. The second was an animal attack, though by the end of September 2016, the forest had grown quiet again. The helicopters were gone, the volunteers had returned home, and the park rangers sealed their reports with the kind of resignation that comes only after weeks of searching without hope. The Beeler River Trail, once alive with shouts and barking dogs, lay empty beneath the early snow. All that remained of Daniel and Savannah Moore was an abandoned car, a collapsed tent, and a trail that led nowhere. The official statement from Yellowstone authorities called it an unresolved disappearance, presumed accidental. It was the sort of phrase meant to end a conversation, not begin one. The families back in South Carolina refused to accept it. Daniel's parents printed flyers and mailed them to hiking clubs across the country. Savannah's sister appeared on local radio stations, pleading for information, her voice steady until it broke mid-sentence. They gathered every photograph they had, the couple smiling on a pier, their wedding under an oak tree, Savannah painting in their kitchen, and turned them into digital posters that floated across social media for months. But the Internet's attention moved fast. By Christmas, the Moores' faces were lost among hundreds of other missing persons. In the first year, there were rumors a body spotted near a river bend, a camera found deep in the woods, but each lead dissolved into nothing. The rangers revisited the site once in spring, hoping the thaw might reveal something, but all they found were animal tracks and fallen branches. Nature, indifferent and efficient, had already covered its secrets. The couple's story slid quietly into the cold files of the Park County Sheriff's Office, their names typed in small print beside the words "Case inactive." Time, as it does, began to harden grief into something heavier. Savannah's mother stopped answering calls from journalists. Daniel's father, once determined to return to Yellowstone himself, no longer mentioned it. Their friends avoided bringing up the trip, as if speaking of it would summon the same fate. The world moved on, except for the families. For them, the silence was unbearable. Every year they marked the anniversary with a small ceremony, lighting candles by the sea, whispering prayers into the wind. 8 years is a long time to live without answers. In those years, the park changed rangers, new trails opened, and old legends faded. Tourists passed the Beeler trailhead without knowing that 2 lives had vanished there. It became one of Yellowstone's many ghost stories, another mystery swallowed by wilderness. And for those who remembered, there was only the ache of uncertainty. No bodies, no closure, no truth to hold on to. By 2024, the world had all but forgotten Daniel and Savannah. Their file gathered dust in a metal drawer, the ink on their photographs beginning to fade. Yet, as with all cold cases, the story wasn't truly over. Somewhere in those mountains, beneath the moss and snow, something waited silent, patient, and unspoiled by time. The forest had kept its secret well. But secrets, even in places as vast as Yellowstone, have a way of coming back. In the spring of 2024, the case that had long slipped from memory stirred back to life in the most grotesque way imaginable. A farmer in northern Yellowstone had reported a large brown bear attacking his livestock. It wasn't unusual in a park that vast, predators and people often crossed paths. Rangers from Fish and Wildlife tracked the animal for days before putting it down. It was supposed to be routine, another line in a field report. But when the carcass was taken to a wildlife lab for autopsy, the routine unraveled into something far darker. Inside the bear's stomach, the biologists found what looked at first like scraps of blue plastic. Under the harsh laboratory light, it became clear that the fragments were fabric-thick synthetic material used in outdoor jackets. Embedded within the mess was a small piece of metal. The technician washed it under running water, expecting perhaps a bullet fragment or hunting debris. Instead, what emerged was a titanium dental implant, nearly intact, glinting like something that should never have been there. A chill settled over the lab. It wasn't the first time human remains had been found in predators, but this was different. The implant was pristine, industrial, and most importantly, traceable. Every medical implant carries a serial number, microscopic but unique, engraved for identification. When the forensic team cleaned the piece, they saw it clearly a string of numbers that could tell a story. Within hours, the data was sent to the manufacturer, and from there to the clinic that had ordered it 8 years earlier. The trail led to Charleston, South Carolina. The patient registered for that specific implant was Daniel Moore. The news hit the Park County Sheriff's Office like thunder after silence. A cold case, closed for nearly a decade, was suddenly open again. The press got hold of it within days. Remains of missing Yellowstone tourist found inside bear. One headline read, "For the Moore's families, the call came at night." Daniel's mother remembered the detective's voice, calm, careful, almost apologetic. For 8 years she had imagined her son frozen somewhere under snow, maybe gone in peace. Now she pictured him devoured. The horror wasn't just in knowing he was dead, but in how death had finally spoken. As the story spread, journalists flocked to Wyoming. News vans lined the gravel road near the lab, broadcasting from beneath the same gray skies that once hung over the search. But this time, it wasn't a mystery of the wilderness, it was a crime. The FBI joined the investigation, coordinating with forensic pathologists and wildlife biologists to retrace the sequence of events. The bear had been killed nearly 60 miles north of where Daniel and Savannah had vanished. Bears roamed far, but not that far. It meant one thing: the couple hadn't died at their campsite. They'd been taken somewhere else. 3 weeks after the discovery, a new search began. Teams used drones and cadaver dogs around the area where the bear had been shot. The terrain was brutal ravines covered in moss, ancient pines toppled over like ribs. On the third day, a dog caught a scent and led the team to a shallow ravine. Beneath a tangle of roots lay a human skull, coated in dirt and moss. It was almost intact except for one thing. From temple to temple, the top had been cut clean off. Not shattered, not crushed sawn, in a perfect horizontal line. The forensic pathologist on site said quietly, "This was done by hand, not a wild animal." DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The skull belonged to Savannah Moore. Her husband's implant had led them here, and her remains told the rest. The cuts on the bone were jagged but deliberate, consistent with a carpenter's saw or fine-toothed blade. Whoever had done it wasn't trying to mutilate, they were trying to conceal. Removing the cranial vault could erase a bullet hole, destroy evidence of trauma, or perhaps serve some darker purpose no one dared name aloud. The FBI's anthropologists dated the bones to late 2017, about a year after the couple disappeared. It meant they hadn't just died in the wild. Someone had killed them, kept their bodies hidden, and later dismembered them before leaving them in this remote ravine. The bear had merely uncovered what had been buried in silence for years. What had once been a mystery of nature had now become something far worse. A story of human cruelty hiding behind the mask of wilderness. For 8 years, everyone believed the forest had swallowed Daniel and Savannah whole. But it hadn't. It had only kept their secret, waiting for a moment, one autopsy, one serial number to finally speak the truth. When the FBI reopened the case, they returned to every scrap of paper, every interview, every forgotten name from the summer of 2016. One detail stood out: a camper registered half a mile from Daniel and Savannah's last known site. At the time, he had been a formality, just another man passing through the park. His name was Marcus Thorne, a 42-year-old handyman from Idaho who'd been camping alone. The original investigators had called him once, briefly. He'd said he hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. The case was cold then, and so the file was closed. But now, with the evidence of dismemberment and the forensic timeline pointing to late 2017, Thorne's name no longer sat quietly on paper. He lived alone in a small rented cabin near the town of Salmon, 3 hours from Yellowstone. Neighbors remembered him as withdrawn, avoiding eye contact, yet oddly polite in short exchanges. He worked odd jobs, fixing fences, repairing barns, building shelves, the kind of work that required tools and patience. Nothing about him suggested danger until investigators learned that in the summer of 2017, almost exactly a year after the Moores disappeared, he too had vanished. He hadn't told his landlord he was leaving, hadn't collected his final pay. One day, he simply stopped showing up. When agents searched his former home, they found little. The fridge still held food, now rotted, cupboards half empty. But what struck them was the absence of personal items. No clothes, no photos, no fingerprints on the surfaces. The house felt sanitized, as if it had been cleaned for inspection. In the shed behind the cabin, the landlord remembered there used to be a set of saws, hammers, and chisels. All gone. Months later, a patrol in northern Montana, barely 20 miles from the Canadian border, discovered an abandoned Ford pickup, locked, spotless, the registration belonging to Marcus Thorne. Inside was nothing. No rubbish, no fingerprints, not even dust. It was as though the vehicle had been wiped of its owner's existence. Investigators stood by the truck, surrounded by pine and silence, and realized that whoever Thorne had been in 2016, the picture forming in the FBI's report was clinical yet monstrous. Thorne likely encountered the couple by chance. Perhaps they argued over a camping spot, or perhaps Savannah's friendliness triggered something in him, an insecurity, a flash of anger. In that moment, the quiet handyman became something else. He killed them both, hastily burned part of the tent to mimic a bear attack, scattered food, and hid the bodies nearby. Then he returned home, resumed life, and lived with the memory. Until, a year later, fear of discovery, or a need to destroy what he'd done, brought him back. That summer of 2017, investigators believe, he dug up the remains. By then, the bodies were decomposed, fragile. He used his carpenter's saws to cut them apart, a crude mechanical act done not out of rage, but precision. The horizontal slice across Savannah's skull, the separation of limbs, the scattering of fragments, all pointed to someone experienced with tools, someone who saw human anatomy not as sacred, but as material. He then transported the remains north, far from the Bealer River, into terrain so wild even the park rangers seldom patrolled it. There, he dumped them into a ravine and left the forest to do the rest. The final step in the reconstruction came from the behavioral analysts. Thorne's disappearance, his cleaned-out home and truck, the timing of his vanishing all aligned perfectly with the forensic estimate of the dismemberment. They believed that after moving the bodies, he crossed into Canada under a false name. Somewhere, perhaps even now, he lives quietly again, fixing fences, smiling politely, just another quiet man in a small town. When the FBI issued their report, it carried one chilling line: the suspect remains at large. The evidence suggests a methodical and deliberate concealment consistent with psychopathic traits. The horror wasn't in the wilderness anymore. It wasn't in the bear, or the storm, or the night. He was in the ordinariness of the man who'd camped half a mile away. The man no one had thought twice about. The man who, for one long night in Yellowstone, became a monster hidden behind human eyes. In the end, the FBI's conclusion was both inevitable and unbearable. Marcus Thorne, the quiet handyman, the man who once pitched his tent a mere half-mile from the moors, was officially named as the prime and only suspect in their murder. His face, pale and hollow-eyed, now stared out from wanted posters across state lines and in Interpol's database, but no one had seen him since the summer of 2017. He had vanished as completely as the couple he killed, swallowed not by wilderness, but by the cracks of civilization. For Daniel and Savannah's families, the announcement brought no peace. After 8 years of silence, they finally had a name, a narrative, a reason, yet justice remained out of reach. There would be no trial, no confession, no final reckoning in a courtroom. Just the knowledge that somewhere out there, perhaps under a different name, someone was still breathing the free air their children would never taste again. Yellowstone kept its stillness. The rivers ran, the forests whispered, and hikers passed the Beeler Trail without knowing what had happened there. The park moved on, as nature always does, erasing footprints, swallowing grief. But the truth, the terrible, human truth, lingers. Somewhere out there lives the man who sawed a woman's skull in half. And perhaps tonight, as you listen, he sits quietly in a cabin, not unlike the one he left behind, a ghost among the living, hidden in plain sight, while the mountains keep their silence.